Hello everyone and welcome to BHT Studios. I'm here to do my first look at the brand new Fujifilm X-T4. But before we begin, let us do the click and listen to this shutter. Can you hear that? Listen to that. Listen to that shutter. Alright, I'll stop doing that. Let's begin the video now. Alright guys, let's kind of go through the basics. There's a lot to go over here. But in terms of pricing, Fujifilm has priced this at $1699.95 US or $2199.99 Canadian. So $1,700 US basically and $2,200 Canadian. Yes. Our money is much weaker than yours, my US neighbors. But at $1,700 US, that is a $200 price difference from the original X-T3 when that was launched. It was basically $1,500 US. So a $200 premium for IBIS that you're getting on here, in-body image stabilization, the articulating screen here, which a lot of people have been asking for, and I will reserve judgment on this until I do my first shooting impressions, and as well as the new battery system in here, which we'll all go over. So I think $1,700 US is a pretty darn fair price for this beautiful camera. And there is two kit lenses. I'm not even going to let you know the price of the XF18-55 2.8 to f4. I think that lens has been kind of overdone over the years. But what's interesting is they have the 16 to 80 millimeter lens, which I actually think is a really a great kit lens. It's a 24 to 105 equivalent. It is f4, but you're getting image stabilization. But with this body, it's not that it's not necessary. It will work in conjunction between OIS and IBIS. But with that, it is going to be $21.99 US for the 16 to 80 with the the X-T4, or $28.99.99 Canadian. And so basically, it's the $300 US savings when you bundle the X-T4 with the XF 16 to 80. And so just for a quick sort of a price comparison, again, the $1,700 US price point basically for the launch price of the X-T4. The X-T3 was $1,500 US dollars, launched back in September of 2018. The X-T3 currently is $1,300 with the grip. That's the current pricing at B&H. That's still a pretty darn good deal. The XH1, when that was first released back in February of 2018, that was $1,900 at launch. And the X Pro 3 that was just launched back in October of 2019, that was launched at $1,800 US for the basic black model. So again, going back, the $1,700 price point for the X-T4 is a very, very fair price. And so now let's go over some of the major specs / changes. It's the same sensor, same processor that's in the X-T3, the X-T30, the X Pro 3, and the X100V, which is the 26 megapixel BSI CMOS X Trans 3, and it has the X processor 4 quad-core processing power in here. So all those cameras have that. It has the same EVF as the X-T3, as well as a sort of a basic similar layout. If you were kind of to look at this very quickly, superficially, other than the articulating screen, it looks a lot like the X-T3. But when you have it next to each other side by side, which I will eventually do. I actually am filming this with the X-T3, and so I'm going to have to swap out bodies to do a comparison, but I will be doing a comparison a little bit later. In addition to what I just said, the key to this camera is, of course, the IBIS, the in-body image stabilization mech, with up to 6.5 stops of stabilization. It is basically the same mechanism from the XH1, but with improvements. It has 30% smaller footprint. It is 20% lighter. And you get a maximum of 1 stop more stabilization depending on the lens that you have attached on there, as well as there's a new magnetic spring system in here, which is part of the reason why what you heard in the shutter, because there is a brand new shutter in here. It has a reduced shutter shock. Now, it doesn't have the feather touch shutter button as the X-H1, which I got really used to and I do like it. It does have a deeper press like the X Pro 3, which I was not a fan of, but you can always put a soft shutter release on the X-T4. It's 30% more sliding, so you can, I mean, listen to that. And you could just feel that sort of, that reduction in shutter shock. It just feels very stable in here. And that's going 15 frames per second. This has, it has double the longevity on the shutter mech on here. It's 300,000 actuation life cycle on this compared to the previous shutter of 150,000, which is not too shabby, but 300,000 is, again, we're getting right up there to the pro top-end DSLR mirrorless level. So that's what you're getting in here. And as I mentioned, it's a deeper press in here, which I just enjoy pressing that. Okay, I'll stop doing that. As well as the fully articulating screen. And so like a lot of DSLRs, as well as on the Panasonic GH series, you have this full articulating screen with 1.6 million dots. And so you do have a wider footprint, obviously, when you have this out to your side here. So it's probably the same screen that's on the X Pro 3. And although it's not the same as the X-T200, which has a 2.76 million dot, but that's a 3.5 inch. My guess is maybe it's not, they can't make it weather sealed yet. And also it's a little bit bigger, right? So it would creep into here, which then cramps your controls on the side here. So that's why they didn't use that. But this is good enough. More dots, the better, I think, because I use the Leica SL2 with 2 million dots, and you can definitely tell the difference with when you're looking at the screen. New battery system, the new NPW235 high capacity. I do have a battery right here. So this is the new battery. I hope that's focused. You can tell it's a fancy battery. This is the older battery here, so it's not that much bigger, right? I mean, it's bigger, you could tell, but it's not a lot bigger. 15-20% bigger, but it has almost, what did I work out the math here? It's 2200 milliamp hours on this new MPW235 versus the older MPW126 had 1260 milliamp hours. So that's 75% more power on this battery from the previous. So they're saying that in economy mode on the X-T4, you're gonna get up to 600 frames. So, you know, who shoots economy? So in regular mode, non-boost, you can get up to 500 frames using the LCD. And with the battery grip, you're gonna get up to 1700 frames. And so new battery, I think this is gonna maybe separate the two types of cameras. I think the X100 system will still use this battery. I think the X Pro 3 will still use this battery. The X-T20 or the X-T30 and then the X-T40, the XE series will use the older MPW126S battery, and then the newer, more professional, perhaps the newer XH2 will use this newer, higher capacity battery. And that's something that people have been complaining about and whining about and wanting, and so Fujifilm has delivered. I have the new grip here. And it looks huge. Let's just kind of screw this on here. All right, so this, look at that. Look at this monster here. And the reason why it's so tall is because the batteries go in vertically. So let's just grab, just keep that down here. Let's grab two of these batteries. And you can see where the pin is. So you got to put the battery in like this. And then you put in the battery like this. All right, and then the battery goes in vertical. Okay, this way. They couldn't make it go this way because I think it just makes the body much thicker. So there's the hole there, and then you turn this, and now you have the grip. Look at this monster camera. Look at that. It's quite big. I still like the grip when the shutter button's down here. I don't like this higher position. I think naturally this is the better spot to have it, but you know, that's the decision here. And you may be wondering like, well, what on earth is that? Well, that's headphone jack. They've kind of regressed because on the XH1, they also had a headphone jack connection in here. So headphone jack now is back on here because the 3.5 millimeter headphone jack is no longer on the body, and we'll go over that a little bit later. So there you go. This is the new battery grip, and with this new grip, okay, so let's go over the charging. So it's 3 hours to charge using the USB-C connection in here to charge the one battery in the body. And if you want to charge all 3 batteries, there is no AC adapter on the grip. You have to still go through the body, okay? I didn't even put this on straight, did I? Oh, because I didn't take this off here. Look at that. And so if you want to charge all 3 batteries, there's no longer a DC in, which is a shame because they want you to use the USB Type-C in, which will charge all 3 batteries. So that's kind of a good thing because before you had to have a separate charger for the grip and then a separate charge for the body. This one in will charge all 3, but you can't use the grip as a separate charger, which I always like using. Like I use my X-H1 as a double battery charger, leave this back in the hotel, and then you can still go out and shoot with the X-H1. You cannot charge the batteries in here without the body, but they do give you the optional, which I don't have a copy of, the optional battery charger. It's called the BCW235, and this grip is called the VG X-T4. And so in terms of charging speed, guys, as I mentioned already, it's a 3-hour charge with the battery inside the body. If you want to charge all 3 batteries using USB-C with a 45-watt charger adapter, which they don't give you, it'll take 3 hours to charge all 3 batteries, or 5.5 hours with a 15-watt AC adapter, which comes with the camera. I don't think it comes with the grip, but that is, you have to go to B&H and when they post it, show you if it comes with a adapter, but they're probably not going to give you a 45-watt charger. They're probably only going to give you a 15-watt charger. But if you do use the external battery charger, which charges 2 batteries at a time, that will take 2.5 hours, again with a 45-watt power source, which Fujifilm could not confirm if that will come with the charger or not, but it looks like in the picture, I'll embed a picture here, it looks like it's a USB-C in connector, and you'll have to find your own wall charger. Get a really nice one like from Anker that'll have the 45-watt charging juice, so it'll charge up faster. All right, I'm going to take this grip off here and get back just to the body. In terms of, okay, so that's that, right? Spent a lot of time on power here. They kept the D-pad, which is a good thing. That's something that people were a bit afraid of. They removed the D-pad on the X Pro 3, as well as they removed it on the X100V. There's a clear distinction of now how they want you to shoot with these cameras versus the X Pro 3, X100V, and other cameras where they would consider them more stills or shooters type camera. The rear AFL button is a little bit bigger. It's a bit, you could tell the shape of it. Let's get in a little bit close here. Tell by the shape of it, it's rounder here, as well as the Q button is recessed in a little bit, and as well as kind of been swapped out with the AEL, but you can reprogram these 3 buttons. You can still make this a Q button and then make this the AEL button or whatever else you want this to be, and so that's kind of been moved around a little bit. The redesign on the side here is kind of the one thing that's a little bit confusing. So I already showed you before, HDMI out, USB Type-C in that can be used for power as well as for a headphone jack. And they do include this kind of a USB-C to 3.5 inch. And the reason why they include that in the kit is because, check this out, up here, they give you the 3.5 millimeter headphone microphone jack in, but then the 2.5 millimeter remote control jack, which I have no idea why that's on there. I mean, I don't even know, does Fujifilm even make a 2.5 mil remote control? Because people just use the app, right? And that just doesn't make sense. So that's kind of is out in left field for that, for a camera like this. So that's really confusing for me. But they did have to redesign this door here because if you are articulating and you are going to be using kind of the selfie articulating mode here, you're going to need, the cables are running through the front here, no longer in the back, right? And so because of that, they had to do a redesign. They couldn't keep the old X-T3 style with the door that was removable. So that's the redesign on the left side here. And also redesigned here on the on the door slot, you could see here the two cards are now stacked and not one in front of each other again, because they're pushing everything backwards this way because of the IBIS mech. And one of the things they're bragging about is the door comes off, but I don't know when or why anyone would want to take the door off, because I don't think it's weather sealed if the door is off, because that's the one thing they can't really seal is the memory card door. And even if they said it is, I wouldn't trust it. I would just always keep the door on, but the door comes off if you want it to come off. So that's changed on this side here. And you know, as I mentioned about the IBIS mech, that's where I'm not sure if you've ever noticed that, a little circle with a line through it. That tells you where the sensor is lined up here. So a lot of this is kind of further back. So you can actually see the little ridge here, that little ridge. And you can even see a redesign in the EVF, well, it's like the fake pentaprism hump here. The angle, once I show you the X-T4, you can notice it. But if you look at it, you're like, there's a little bit of a difference. It's more like the XH1. There's more of an angle here. So sort of hide the fact that this is actually a deeper body than the previous body. And the lines are also sharper. So as you're looking very carefully, you can tell that see that little ridge there? So sure, this button is a little bit thicker, but then now there's a ridge that you have to deal with. So that's something you have to think about. As well as you can tell, they moved a couple of things. No longer is shooting stills and video switching on this side, which always irritated me because it was a far left to get to video, and then it was like 7 clicks in to go to stills. If you're switching from stills to video, you know it was a very slow process, and now it's just right here. You just go from movie to stills, movie to stills, very quick, and you lose that metering switching. But I never switched the metering modes anyways. I always kept it in the multi-segment metering, and so this is a very welcome change. And in terms of day-to-day shooting, this is probably where I'm going to notice the biggest difference, because for me, I am a hybrid shooter, and so having that switch there is great. And as well, they have now the HDR feature in drive mode. You don't have to go through menus to access it. It's like right there for those of you that like shooting it. And I tested the HDR on the X Pro 3, and I really liked it. And so I'm glad that that's there. But it's right next to stills, which is nice, because I'm not going to use continuous. I mean, the continuous high is just for fun. It's just so I could do this and listen to that. Wow. I'm counting down that 300,000 actuations very quickly. So those are the sort of the basic outside changes, little small refinements as well. There's a little pinch squeeze here. You can see like the little clips there, and that helps you to remove there you go. Remove that, so it makes it easier, and it locks it in as well. And this is the same size as the X-T4 and the XH1. I did try it, so this will fit on the older one. So if you have an X-T4 and XH1 and you want this newer one that will lock into place, you can buy this newer model. So these little refinements from the previous one. The dial feels a little bit tighter on these, but again, that could be just because the X-T4 now is like a year and a half old and everything's starting to loosen up. But overall, it's a nice refinement over the previous model physically, other than the two that kind of like, I don't like the deep press shutter, although I love this magnetic spring system, and the sound of the shutter is just beautiful. And this headphone, they put a 2.5 mil remote control, which is really weird. I don't know why they did that, but that's all the major external differences. So now let's move on to the internal differences. So as I played in the menus here, really the refinement to me, other than the physical refinements that we saw, a lot of it's just internal. I really like what they did with the firmware. And basically looking through, it's the closest to the X Pro 3 in terms of how they use the firmware to work with this the X processor 4, and they're really squeezing a lot out of it. So it has the -6 EV autofocus, it has the autofocus limiter, HDR, all those things that was in the X Pro 3. Well, it's here in the X-T4 with other things added, and this may be the final iteration of this processor in terms of getting as much out of this as it can before the next generation. Now, due to this quick switching and video features in the menus, you can see here. So let's go into the regular shooting menu here. You can see that, and what do you notice is you don't see the video icon. Well, that's because it has its own menu system, which is great. Because remember before in the video, everything was in that one huge folder. So you switch to video, but this is the one thing I don't like. It switches into video mode. I wish that if you're in menu mode and then you switch between video and stills, it just keeps you in the menu mode, and it doesn't do that. So it jumps you out and you gotta jump back in, but here you go. So now you have its own separate video movie mode here, and now it separates everything. You can see that it has like the frame rates is the first thing you see, which is the first thing you want to see, and then they have IQ, and then you have the various autofocus modes, microphone level, time code, and then your actual user settings. And basically what happens is if the setting in here affects both, there's a little icon that tells you, hey, look, if you change this, it'll change on both stills and movie. And so I like how it's all separated. So when you're in video mode, you hit menus, bang, it even has its own unique My Settings, separate video as well as stills, as well as a separate Q menu. So when you're in Q, I think I changed Q to this button here. Like the X Pro 3, it has the 4, 8, 12, 16, and you can pick transparent or solid black. You have its own separate queue for just video as well as for just still. So that's, again, like I was saying, the refinement and the tweaking the firmware is just fantastic. So if you are a hybrid shooter, this is a huge, huge bonus for us. Another feature and that's been improved on video, and sorry if you guys aren't video guys, but this is kind of a big deal for us video shooters, is that before in video, you couldn't select the size of the focus points, and now you can. See that? You can go to super tiny or bigger. So if you're in area, you can look at that. You can group that, and then you can actually track, and we'll talk about that in a second here. So that's great that you can pick the autofocus points while you're in video. Another thing that they've added, a couple of extra film simulation. They have now the Eterna bleach bypass. And they also have, so that's unique to the X-T4, as well as the other ones that were added to the X Pro 3, which is my favorite classic negative. So this one here, I'm looking forward to testing. I never liked Eterna. It was way too flat for me. This is a little bit, it has a bleach bypass, but has a little bit more kick, a little bit more punch when it comes to the contrast. So I'm actually, and that will work for both stills as well as in movie mode. There's new boost modes. Boost this, boost that, boost everything. You can access the various boost modes in the custom function buttons. So they have performance boosts. There's image stabilization boost, which is actually only for video. They have the viewfinder boost mode, and as well there's it's not boost, but in terms of white balance, they have a white balance priority mode. There's a new compressed raw. Other than the lossless compression and then uncompressed, now there's a compressed raw. And then now there's a tone curve in half stops. Another cool feature with the video power, and I was talking about the X processor 4, is that now you can record video to both cards, not just one, but make sure that if you're shooting 4K, 400 megabits per second, you need a high-speed card on both slots, but you can now write video, you can back up video, because one of the things is with stills, you can always have it as a backup, or you can do JPEG in one and RAW in the other, but with video, you are stuck with just using one card. But if you're doing some really critical video work and then the card crashes, now you can write to both cards at the same time, which is great for video creators. And just to go quickly over the video features here, other than the changes I mentioned, so it does have, the H.265 at 420 10-bit internal, 422 10-bit external, H.264, but now there's a new feature called MP4 H.264 AAC, and so they say that it's more suitable for uploading to the internet. So let's just see if I can bring that up here, and so let's just go back to video mode, and let's go video file format. Here we go. So here are the video modes. So right there it says suitable for, what is it, suitable for uploading to the internet, not compatible with, and blah, 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 blah. So for someone like me who's a YouTuber, maybe doing these kind of top-down videos, as well as, if you're vlogging and you just don't, you're not shooting a Hollywood movie or something high-res, you could use it at a lower quality, you can say, I guess, and so you're not wasting a lot of card space. So I think that's a good addition. If you never use it, then big deal, you don't have to use it. Another video improvement is now you can, for high-speed recording, check this out. Turn it on, you get 240 frames per second, guys. So you still got the 120, but now you got up to 240, and that is in 1080. It's not in 4K, but even still, like 240, that is awesome. At 200 megabits per setting recording to a maximum of 3 minutes, which is still pretty darn good because you're using it for B-roll. Or at 120p, you get, again, 200 megabits per second recording up to approximately 6 minutes. And so that's another update on here, which can find its way to the X-T3 because, again, it's the same processor and the same sensor. Another addition that's on here that's different is, and let's see if I can find it here, is image stabilization in video. So you got IBIS and OIS, and the boost is on, so you should be able to. Now, for whatever reason, I can't add, but you can see it there. It's darkened now. This is probably something that I've blocked, but it can do IBIS and OIS, which gives you up to 6.55 stops of stabilization. But with video, now there is going to be a penalty for this with the digital image stabilization, which is you will lose 10%. There's going to be a 10% crop. So that's a 1.29 crop in when you're shooting 4K if you decide to add this digital image stabilization. And it does not work for the high-speed video recording that I just previously mentioned in here. Another upgrade is in the wide tracking. So if you're shooting video and you are wide tracking, you do have this new wide tracking AF mode, which works both for stills and for video, where it will it has a new face select mode, so you can select the person's face and you hit I think the AF lock button here, and then it will then continually follow that person. Now I'm gonna have to do a full test. I did a quick test and it worked pretty darn good, but I want to go outdoors and really test this feature. But now you can select the face, lock it on in video as well as in stills, and so that's something that I'm really looking forward to doing. And again, that's in wide tracking AF mode. There's lots of little refinements in this new firmware, which a lot of it can be pushed to the X-T3, the X Pro 3, but it seems like there's a lot of processing power on the X Processor 4. Unlike the previous X Processor Pro, which was a third iteration that was in the XH1 and the X-T2, this new quad-core processor, fourth iteration, seems to have a lot of headroom, lots of room for improvement, everything from autofocus speed to video features, for example, the 240 frames per second, and as well as the addition of digital image stabilization. I'm just as excited about the firmware in the X-T4 as I am the hardware improvements. So that's my kind of not quick overview of the physical features as well as the internal firmware features. I'm sure I missed a few, so I'm really happy with the updates. And so now from here, let's go and compare the X-T4 with its competition within the Fujifilm range. You get a good idea of how this compares to the X-T3, the X Pro 3, the XH1, right? So let's start that part now. All right, X-T4 versus XH1. This is the OG. This is the original X-series camera body that had IBIS. Because it was so big, the IBIS mech, it was ground up, made by Fujifilm. They didn't have time to shrink it, so they made the camera bigger. They leveraged the larger size of the IBIS and decided to put a bigger grip. There would have been room for a bigger battery in here as well as putting this top panel on here, a feather touch shutter. It had a dampened shutter as well. And let's just even compare here the sound. Let's compare the sound. All right, that's the XH1. Much faster, right? It just sounds different. This actually does feel like, because it's moving faster, maybe there's a little bit more vibration. Because remember, the body on the XH1 is bigger, so it could probably handle dampening a little bit better because, this is a thicker chassis, thicker paint job on here. This is a more ruggedly built camera than the X-T4. Not that this is not rugged, but All right, and in terms of weight, the XH1 is 673 grams versus the X-T3 607 grams with battery and card inserted. So the difference in the X-T4 and the X-T3, not a huge weight difference, but there's quite a chunkified difference between these two cameras. You could definitely feel it in the weight of the camera here. Personally, I like the button layout better on the XH1 versus the X-T4. I still say this is the best X series camera button layout. The AFL, AEL buttons are much bigger on here. As you can you see that there? There you go. The buttons are both, so sure, the X-T4 is an improvement over the X-T3, but the button is still bigger. I don't mind the position of the Q button on the XH1, and everything else. You can look at the thumb real estate and the grip as well. The grip is just chunkified on the XH1. And with the XH1, when you put the grip, so here, let's put the grip on both these cameras here. So here's the XH1. Here you go, XH1 with the grip. The X-T4, like the X-T3, has to add a little bit of a grip, right? Because there wasn't enough of a grip, or else why would they add the extra chunkified grip? Here we go. So the body itself is bigger on the XH1, but once you put the grip, you can tell that the battery grip, because as I mentioned before, the batteries on the X-T4, it goes in vertically. It goes in this way, right? Versus the XH1, like the X-T3, goes in flat this way. So it keeps the profile lower. So with the grip on, they are about the same size. Now the XH1, in terms of how many frames you're going to get out of the battery, I think the best comparison, like they compared it against the X-T3, it's not fair because the X-T3 doesn't have the addition of the shutter mech that's going to be in the way, right? So the XH1 without the grip had a battery life CPA rating of 310 frames using the previous battery, and this one here at regular mode has 500 frames, and so that's a 60% improvement on battery life, even though it's 75% more battery. So that tells me that this actually, even compared to the XH1, because of all those firmware updates, there's a lot more happening. So this camera body is actually way more battery hungry, and I would be scared if they decided to keep the older battery on here. It may have had a lower frames of 310. This might have been like 275 or something if they kept the old battery. So it's a good thing that they decided to put a bigger battery, and they probably learned that when they put the X processor 4 in the GFX 100, and they could see how the X processor 4 works with IBIS in a camera that has a lot of extra turbo like features in here. So the new battery was clearly necessary on the X-T4. Now there is rumor that originally they were trying to pick between the X-T4 and the XH2, and they decided to go with the X-T4. But now people are talking about, no, there's going to be an XH2, which I'm excited. This came out kind of at the wrong time, I think. It came out in February of 2018, as I mentioned. They should have waited for the X processor 4 and the new X-Trans 26 megapixel sensor that's in the X-T3 and put it in here, but they rushed it out in February of 2018, and then in September of 2018 they came out with the X-T3. And so we've always kind of wondered, like, what would have been if the XH1 had the same processor sensor. And I think really if they released the XH1 at the same time as the X-T3 in September of 2018 with the same sensor and processor, and then there would have been that $400 premium on top, I think it would have made a lot more sense. So I think the timing of the XH1 was just a little bit wrong, but I still think this is a very awesome camera. This does use the previous sensor and processor as the X-T2, the X Pro 2, the X-T20, the X-T3, and the X100F. So it had its limits. And so in one way, I'm a little bit sort of not worried, but somewhat concerned that this also suffers a similar fate as the XH1 in that this uses the same sensor processor that's in the X-T3, the X-T30, the X100V, the X Pro 3, and the same processor, not the same sensor, but the same processor as the GFX 100. So they're using, this is a late model processor sensor. And so if there is an XH2 coming, my guess is that they're going to release the new 5th generation sensor and the 5th generation processor in an XH2 sometime later this year or next year. And so that is one, like compared to the X-T4, it has the same processor sensor. And that's the only negative thing, but no one really complained about the X-T3 not having enough juice, right? So I think that's kind of a moot point. And so that's my look, my comparison between these two. If you have an XH1 and you are happy with the IBIS in here, but you're not happy with the autofocus, that's a good reason to switch to the X-T4. But if you're a stills guy like me, and for video you only use B-roll and manual focus, I think you just stick with the XH1. It's still a great camera. But that's my first look comparing these two. And now let's move on to my next comparison. This may seem like a weird one, but I am just going to compare this against the X-T100, specifically the articulating screen. Now when this came out, people were pretty excited and hoped that something like this would be able to go on to one of the more professional XT series, but this had a front-facing articulating screen, which is fantastic. Same problem as the X-T4, the connectors are here, so the cabling can kind of get in the way. The X-T100 though had a little secret power, is this also articulated this way here. And so you could hide the cables in behind here, but that's not the main reason why they did that. The main reason they had this is because you could still articulate this way, right? Like a regular kind of a two-way articulating camera here. So you're not going as wide. So if you're gonna shoot stealth and kind of tight and narrow and shoot this way, you could do that with the X-T100. With the X-T4, if you love to shoot down low, you can't. So so now you have the screen like this, right? You can't articulate this way. You actually have to swing it out and sideways, but you're going 50% wider now, right? You cannot articulate down low here. You have to go way out the side like this. If that is a problem, then to me, it's kind of a problem. I don't need to front articulate for myself. As a YouTuber and as a vlogger, I don't like seeing myself. I'm pretty good at framing what's happening. And if I need to properly monitor, I just use an external monitor or use something like the Mars 400S wireless monitoring system that I'm actually using right now to watch this video. So that's the one thing. You want to shoot down low, you want to shoot waist level, you're going sideways. And so but one positive is you can flip it in and sort of cover the back, which is great. And so I just wanted to show that. All right, now let's look at these two cameras. I'm not really comparing them because they're very different. I think that these two cameras are great companion cameras to each other. This is out for fun, and this is, you're a wedding photographer or sports photographer. Maybe you want two of these, and then this is just kind of for fun. Instead of having like an X100V, maybe this is a better way to go because you have an interchangeable lens system. The X Pro 3 is technically slightly wider than the X-T4, but it is definitely, as you can tell, it's much lower profile because it doesn't have that EVF sort of DSLR fake pentaprism hump along the top there. And so this makes it a lot easier to sort of take it in and out of your bag. There's no kind of sharp edges like, the X-T4 and the XH1 and the X-T3 has this large EVF sort of eye cup that sticks out the back. And if you're carrying this with a strap across body, that's actually always pushing up against your body. The X Pro 3, this is more flush, right? So it's a lot easier to carry. It definitely is lighter as well. So carrying this around all day, the kind of unique thing between both of these is, you can hide the LCD on both these cameras, which is pretty darn cool. And one advantage of the X Pro 3 is if you are shooting waist level, you're nice and tight, right? Again, with the X-T4, you're this wide. So look at the difference in width. You have more depth, so you're still kind of tight and narrow and shooting like this, right? With this camera here, you're kind of, your other hand, what do you do with this other hand? But this is sticking way out the side, unless you just keep it this way. And so I did find at times, if I wanted to be a little bit more stealthy, you just have to, I didn't like swinging this out. I just decided to leave this in this position and kind of shoot blindly. That's kind of what I found. So that's the one advantage, if you can call it that, shooting more discreetly. Now the EVF is very similar between the X Pro 3 and the X-T4. It has that 3.69 million dot EVF. It has the 100 FPS. But the EVF eye relief is much better on the X-T4. You're getting 0.75 magnification versus just a 0.66. On the X Pro 3, obviously you have the hybrid viewfinder, great for street photography without having to go into sport mode, which you can with the X-T4, which gives you that crop, but then you can see outside the frame lines. Both share a very similar tweaked firmware. So in terms of IQ and performance, you're going to get the exact same image quality minus the IBIS. And so again, these two cameras do compare very well against each other in terms of performance, much more so than the X-T3, even though they share the same sensor processor, all three of these cameras. And what I would like to compare the analogy between these two cameras and the fact that Fujifilm has made it very clear that these cameras are for two different people. This, if you like cars, hopefully this analogy will work. This is a two-seater convertible and this is an SUV. For someone like myself, I'd rather have an SUV as well as a two-seater convertible. There are times when you need an SUV. There's times you need all that extra space, that extra power, the luggage room, you know, all that kind of stuff. And other times you just want to go around for a cruise and you don't need the extra seats, you don't need the extra power, you don't need any of that stuff. The thing is, same engine, same processor. In both of these, you just shoot very differently. You know, I have a X Pro 3 and I have an XH1. I did not buy the X-T3 because it came out so much closely after the XH1 that I didn't need the autofocus speed. So I just kept the XH1. So for someone like me who has an X Pro 3 and an XH1, the decision to upgrade to the X-T4 is a lot easier. And so that's my comparison between the X Pro 3 and the X-T4. Companion cameras, two-seater sports car, SUV. All right, guys, this is the test here. This is the comparison. The X-T4 with the X-T3. They look a lot alike, but in person, they're quite different. There is an updated design language. The reason for it is because the camera is definitely thicker. So this angle on the X-T3, it's more sharp, and this is a little bit, it falls back a little bit more like that. There you go, on the X-T4. Same height, 2.1 millimeters wider. It definitely feels wider. And at the thickest point is 5 millimeters thicker. And that probably has to do with the grip here on the X-T4. And it is 2.5 millimeters thicker in the body. So that's kind of where you could probably tell the difference right in this little, as I mentioned, this little hump, this little ridge here, where you're not going to get that on the X-T3. So that little extra space you're getting, and as I mentioned before, even the card slots have been pushed back on here, where the X-T3, the card slots here is sort of stacked one on top of the other, like the previous, the XH1 and the X Pro 3. And so it's 68 grams heavier, but you know, considering you're getting this fully articulating screen, considering you have IBIS and you have this much larger, bigger, higher capacity battery, 68 grams is not a big deal. So they did a pretty good job in keeping the weight down and the size not so big. You no longer get the little goofy little flash that would throw in the kit. Fujifilm basically said they realized people weren't really using the flash, and I've never seen anyone using that goofy clip-on flash. Kaizen improvements, as I mentioned before, that little eye cup. Hey, let's just do it right now. You just pinch this, you just pull this up here, and now it should just work. And there you go. And it actually locks into place on the X-T3 as well. So if you're not going to upgrade to the X-T4, you can still buy the upgraded X-T4 eye cup and put it on to your X-T3. As mentioned before, there are some small sort of ergonomic improvements other than the extra features, but really the biggest improvement in terms of the physical thing is going between movie and still mode. So here, as I mentioned before, to go from movie to still, you got the movie mode here, and then you got to switch over to S. And you have to kind of know that it's basically 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you're in movie mode. So if you want to go back to stills, you got to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Where now with the X-T4, it's super simple. All you do is just go like this, and now you're going between the two, which also, as I showed before, it finds its way even in the menu. So that makes it a lot easier to go through. The old silent movie mode is now called optimized control, which adds a few extra features in here, which is great. But I still want to be able to access without having to press this set button. Having this all in here, but having to press the screen. I wish you could just maybe customize one of these buttons here to get into the video mode. I think that'd be a much better feature. And as well, the upgraded battery, right, is an improvement, but because there is no DC input on the X-T3, you could still plug in the charger and the grip separately from the body. Now you have to use a USB-C connection. So to me, that's kind of a step backwards, but it is nice that through the body, the USB-C port on the X-T4, you can now charge all 3 batteries, which is a good thing. The previous X-T3, I actually like this here, a removable side door here, and then you have the microphone in, headphone in, USB-C, HDMI. This one here, as I showed before, there's 2 separate doors, and the reason for that makes sense because now you can articulate forward this way, but you lose the headphone in. You can do so on here by using the adapter, but I still think this was a better implementation on the X-T3. So let's put this back in here. Another big improvement is the shutter. It's a lot more. So here's this shutter, right? I don't know why it's pausing like that. And here's the X-T4. And for some reason, I can't seem to, for the life of me, figure out why it's not going. It could just be that this is a pre-production model, but the drive setting, I can't seem to get it faster. There is a 15 frames per second mode. I think something is blocking it. I can't figure out what I'm blocking. So this has actually been going at 10 frames per second. I'm not getting that. And I have everything kind of, I think, in the right setting. Everything's on boost, but we'll figure that out later. But if you just listen to that though. It's way more dampened. It's more quiet versus the X-T3, right? You're getting more vibrations on here as well. So that's, to me, a huge upgrade on the over the X-T3 is that new shutter, 300,000 versus 150,000 actuations. And then now finally, let's talk about the articulating screen. Now this was not a horrible one. I actually like the X Pro 3 better because if you're shooting straight down, the EVF hump, the eye cup is kind of in the way, but you can always articulate a little bit that way, and you're stealthy and you're thin like this, right? With the X-T4, to do that same thing, now you gotta be out this way. You're out wider, and so if you like to shoot down below waist level and you wanna stay narrower, you're gonna have to just kind of put up, or maybe shoot like this, I don't know. And then that's totally weird. But you have to shoot out sideways this way. If it's back this way, there is no tilt feature. I showed you on the X-T100 where you can shoot this way as well as to articulate this way like that, which is a great design, but maybe they couldn't make it weather sealed or maybe it just made it too thick. And it is nice that you can cover this like this, and obviously you can't do that with this. But it comes down to your shooting style. Do you like a fully articulating screen or not? That really comes down to you. And the final thought is, one of the things I'm really, really excited about was just the tweaking of the firmware. It almost feels like it's a brand new processor, but it's not. The same X processor 4 that's in the X-T3, the X-T30, the X100V, the X Pro 3, and the GFX 100. That same processor is in both the X-T3 and the X-T4, but it just feels so different. So hopefully there is, I did hear rumor that in the summer they are going to push a major firmware update on the X-T3, and a lot of the improvements that were incrementally added after the X-T3's release, especially the X Pro 3 that got kind of one of the biggest leaps, firmware features and sort of whatever is built in, like things like improved autofocus -60V, extra features like focus limiter, autofocus face lock, HDR, the new digital image stabilization. Maybe they can put that into the X-T3, and even though there is no IBIS in here, tone clarity controls, better controls, in-camera TIFF output, improved Q menu separating from video and from stills, new film simulations like classic neg, as well as the new Eterna bleach bypass. All those things, hopefully they will add those features. Now, I don't think they're going to do it next week because, obviously they want more sales of the X-T4, but I think it would be smart for Fujifilm to push all those features that they just released on the X-T4 and put it in the X-T3. More important, in fact, I think, than pushing them over to the X Pro 3, because a lot of those video features, I don't think a lot of X Pro 3 guys would really care that much. I mean, I have an X Pro 3, I think it would be great, but I'm not dying for it. I think X-T3 X-T3 guys really need that. And so hopefully Fujifilm will be able to push that to the X-T3 on a firmware update. And then basically it comes down to, I don't think this articulating screen is better or worse. It depends on your shooting style. I say some guys will actually prefer this type of articulating screen instead of this. So really what you're gaining is a new battery, and you're gaining the IBIS. And if neither of those two things are a big deal, I think sticking to the X-T3 is still great, because I didn't hear too many people complaining about the X-T3. It's still a great camera and a great deal right now at $1,300 US with the hand grip. And so that's my thoughts on comparing both the X-T3 and the X-T4. And let's just close off my video now. Alright guys, so that was my first look of the brand new Fujifilm X-T4. I have to go out and test it and shoot with it to really see what I think. I think this is going to be a killer camera. But even that new shutter mech in here, 300,000 cycles, actuations that are in here, and having IBIS. And I think really this is the XF 16 to 55 f2.8, a favorite amongst pro photographers because of that fast f2.8 constant aperture. And now you have image stabilization on here, right? And any lens, and I have a couple of cool lenses here. This is a Surui anamorphic lens, and this is not just for videographers. You know, even if you're a stills photographer, being able to shoot and getting a 1.33 times wider, you're gonna get really cool, like sort of a panoramic beyond 16:9 aspect ratio. And by you know, shooting it and then de-squeezing it, and I even maybe I'll embed it a product shot using this. And so I'm gonna be testing this on here, and now I have stabilization for either shooting video as well as for shooting stills using cool lenses like this. So again, the pricing is going to be $1,699 US, so just under $1,700 US for the X-T4 body, only coming in both silver or black. Or just under $2,200 Canadian. Availability, Fujifilm said sometime in April, but it's still to be announced. Let's just see when the for sale date is and see how fast all of us could get a copy. And as well, I don't have a copy, as I mentioned before, but being able to have the 16 to 80, even though that lens already is stabilized and is a great lens on the X-T3, will be even better on the X-T4. And so what a great combination. And with the 16 to 80, that'll be just under $2,200 US, or just under $2,900 Canadian. But I still think amongst pros, this may be it. And yeah, so look for my first shooting impressions video, which should be short because I only had a week before I'm creating all this content. And I'm gonna have more of a long-term review, and Fujifilm's gonna take this on the road and let people play with it. And I think I'm gonna get myself a copy. I'm pretty darn excited because I did skip the X-T3 because I had an X-H1. I felt basically X-H1 has everything that I need for video features, and it has IBIS. So I stuck with the X-H1, did not buy the X-T3, waiting for either an X-H2 or an X-T4. And now that the X-T4 has come out, and me just playing with it, you're getting better IBIS, better battery life. You're also getting a improved shutter mechanism. I think it's a win-win for the X-T4, other than the one thing that I mentioned is this articulating screen. It's probably the one weakness for me. I just didn't need it to flip out and forward. Vloggers might be excited, but how many vloggers are out there in the world, and how many vloggers do we really want out there in the world? And even for me when I vlog, I'm actually really happy using the X Pro 3 because it's light and compact, and there's no screen on the back. You can kind of hold it like this, which you can do with the X T4 as well. You could just flip it backwards and hold it like this, but it's also a bigger, heavier body. But for everything else, I think the X-T4 is where it's at. So I'm excited. So thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like. I know I'm going to get tons of comments down below, especially why does Taka talk so much, so fast, for so long? I'm just pretty darn excited about this camera. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll talk to you soon. And happy shooting. Hear that? Beautiful.